Greetings, everyone. Please excuse the sunglasses. I'm required to wear them even indoors due to recent eye surgery. I've been invited to give a talk on pointers toward an Aquarian civilization. And I'll begin by reading three quotes that are relevant keynotes to the entire presentation. The first is from René Rilke, and he says, "The future enters into us in order to transform itself in us long before it happens." And then from Dostoevsky, "Understand me, voluntary, completely conscious, and totally unconstrained self-sacrifice for the benefit of all is, in my opinion, a token of the greatest achievement of individuality, of its greatest power, its greatest self-control, the greatest freedom of its own will." And then from Sri Raghavan Iyer, "The universal Aquarian diffusion of the true ideal of spiritual science and lifelong learning will enable human beings to awaken a vibrant sense of universal justice, universal compassion, and universal concord." In thinking about the bold and humbling theme, the future of theosophy and humanity, what immediately comes to mind is certain tantalizing and prophetic comments from W.Q. Judge's Echoes from the Orient. In this intriguing theosophical booklet, Judge refers to the intense karmic precipitations taking place in America, not only then, but for the foreseeable future. Such psychological and social fermentations, he said, are preparatory to the eventual emergence in distant epochs of what he termed lustrous civilizations. Civilizations mirroring the high cultures from 11,000 and even 100,000 years ago. Judge's dialectical juxtaposition of psychic precipitations on the Northern American continent with preparations for lustrous civilizations was later elucidated and expanded during the 1975 cycle by Sri Raghavan Iyer in his seminal opus, Parapolitics Toward the City of Man. The latter work posits what the author calls, quote, "the fundamental revolution from elitism to equality," a pulsating moral and spiritual force that has been progressively gathering worldwide momentum since the time of the Buddha. This Shiva-like leveling impulse is involved in the destructuring of political, social, and religious authority everywhere. The surface turbulence of this sweeping transformational current, so full of sound and fury, often occludes its deeper cathartic potential, its hidden promise for self-regeneration, its ability to redirect our moral and intellectual energies towards expansive ideals and vigilant practices. All spiritual philosophies are anti-entropic in nature and continually summon the valorous spirit in man, reignite his waning moral idealism, test his willingness to suffer and to self-correct, and provide preliminary cartographies of consciousness that show him the painful pathways to the artesian springs of spiritual self-regeneration for the sake of the larger good. All of these ennobling characteristics are especially true of Teosofía, or Gupta Vidya. The orbit of the sacred is perpetually revolutionary, and the rich, open-ended philosophy of Theosophy inspirits the often confused, perverse, and deluded mind of man. Its divine purveyors and their timely teachings are deeply therapeutic to the frustrations of the soul and help illuminate the path of right action to the committed. And most importantly, The Gupta Vidya is always Promethean in character, forward-looking and purposive. The past is simply the educative prologue to the present and can never wholly bind the future prospects for mankind as a whole. For this reason, we cannot, as conscientious students of the Bodhisattvic path, sublease our own budding vision of a more enlightened tomorrow to the historical determinants, sociological statisticians, or overeducated cynics. It would also be a mistake to heed the siren call of beguiling technological utopias. However powerful and seductive these utopian templates might be, the whirling currents of the present era may have little to do with the emerging men, women, and civilizations of tomorrow. In truth, only a sage can see coming centuries in their hidden embryonic form, because only the spiritually wise can penetrate into the arcanum of invisible, unfolding spiritual causes at work in man and society. To quote the sagacious King Solomon, "Who is the wise man? He who sees what is going to be born." To the sage, then, the global civilization of tomorrow is here now, in embryonic Akashic form. But how do we, as mere students of the wisdom religion, come to discern the raindrops of lustrous civilizations that might well presage a coming monsoon? Fortunately, in addition to parapolitics, Sri Raghavan Iyer penned a series of articles in the 1980s in Hermes magazine on different facets of an emerging Aquarian civilization. These profound and provocative thought pieces give us clues to the potential mirroring of golden age ideals in receptive cultures, intentional communities, and authentic civilizing centers across the 7 continents of the good earth. These seminal articles on the prospects for a magnanimous Aquarian civilization in Kali Yuga offer no static or concretized blueprint of the man and society of the Aquarian age. Aquarian civilization is primarily a translucent divine imago, a fertile object of purest thought, a parapolitical model of high culture that guides minds, quote, blunt to all but universal truths, unquote. The Hermes articles referenced often offer pivotal pointers, as well as quintessential characteristics of a refined ethical mentality, which could become the philosophical and metapsychological basis of numerous social and communal visualizations in the Aquarian age. Visualizations that could be seen in the apt phrase of Louis de Lamartine as imaginative prototypes of truth at a distance. The points I will now be making about Aquarian civilization should be seen as humble, quote, offerings to Krishna, unquote, drawn from our revered teachers, past and present. At their very best, these speculations are intelligible, quote, whisperings of the Buddhi to the manas, unquote, so helpfully referenced by Master K.H. They are observations and discussion points for us to think about as we move, by degree, more fully into the age of Aquarius, resolute to keep our most inclusive ideals of fraternity alive in our hearts, so that we might meaningfully contribute to mature civilizations yet to come. Heart fidelity to spiritual ideals is critical because we are the committed custodians of the mystery fires. In the previous Piscean age, early Christian purveyors of the good news stressed the horizontal dimension of love in Jesus and Jesus's teachings, and increasingly marginalized the vertical dimension of truth, or gnosis. Although Jesus urged his followers to, quote, be ye perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect, unquote, the vertical ideal of self-knowledge was blatantly ignored, while love was set forth as the primary salvific quality of the true Christian, most especially love of Jesus as God. Turning to the Aquarian age, we learn that the emphasis will be on thought, on universal truths, on impersonal principles, scientific and ethical. And truth will only serve to make Eros more intelligent, not irrelevant. In other words, the inner quest for spiritual knowledge among all frontier innovators will lead to the conscious cultivation of a spiritual intellectuality. The love of and meditation on universal principles and fresh modes and codes of social engagement will undoubtedly preoccupy the best minds. To the latter, unitary ethics will point the way to the compassionate use of all forms of knowledge. The gestation of spiritual insights will gradually wean the embodied mind of man from its preoccupation with materialistic desires, and instead nourish it with the milk of humane and unselfish aspirations. Thus, in many Aquarian societies, there will be fearless spiritual mountain climbers seeking to discover encompassing perspectives and enriching vistas that complement the infinite horizontal reach of the feeling of love in action, which the Piscean age encouraged and is so vital in every age of the rotating zodiacal dial. Culturally speaking, the de-glamorization of government, the collapse of tottering Byzantine bureaucracies, and the painful disengagement from technologically driven social media will create an urgent need for cooperation and collaboration among increasingly isolated citizens if the emergence of an egalitarian republic of conscience is to rise, phoenix-like, out of the ashes of the failed political experiments of both traditional and new democracies. In light of this chilling prospect, there will no doubt be a universal cry for more accountable leaders, Aquarian leaders. If this proves true, then how might we characterize such Aquarian leaders? It is now apparent that the global impulse for individual liberty and human equality is sweeping through most religious, social, and political structures, East and West, North and South. Indeed, many citizens of the globe are ardently searching for an anti-entropic, perpetually self-validating modality of leadership that focuses on enduring moral values within formal laws and encourages emulation without demanding adulation. In this sense, leadership is now increasingly conceived in horizontal rather than vertical terms. This is encouraged and recognized everywhere in modern society, especially where there is initiative, knowledge, verve, and personal responsibility for the common good. Horizontal leadership is thus viewed as cooperative, extensive, and inclusive, rather than hierarchical, concentrated, and insular. The new Aquarian leader reaches out rather than reaches down, walks beside those he or she leads rather than walks ahead. In this egalitarian-inspired view, leadership is not to be understood in terms of a static pyramid that funnels energy and initiative from the apex downward toward a passive base. In the compelling imagery of Emerson, the potent lateral motion of the new global leader generates expanding concentric circles that eventually inspire benevolent initiatives and other committed pioneers across the globe. The current Dalai Lama is a superb example of spiritual leadership. Malala of moral leadership, while the late Nelson Mandela was an inspiring model of compassionate political leadership as he rejected revenge by native South Africans on the Afrikaner population and instead instituted forgiveness for the past and racial cooperation for the good of the beloved community for the future. In the world of thought, science could be one of the torchbearers of a variegated, open-textured metaphysics in the Aquarian civilizations of ensuing centuries. Why? Because science is progressively tending in the direction of becoming more self-critical, inwardly and awkwardly more agnostic, and surprisingly receptive to the spiritual in certain respects. It is highly likely the more complex science becomes, the more it will continue to encounter fresh mysteries that it simply cannot solve with its limited methodologies and its implicit materialistic assumptions that posit a, quote, happen chance, unquote, cosmos, bereft of any internal guiding intelligence. In today's scientific community, we are told, there are those who admit that the established laws of physical nature are so complex and intelligently balanced by nature itself that it is perfectly reasonable for a scientist to entertain the possible existence of what the mathematical physicist Freeman Dyson termed cosmic minds, minds that govern the universe and the atom, and most importantly, integrate everything in nature through the creative and ordering intelligence of man. Further, additionally, the fact that some physicists are claiming that personal identity after the dissolution of the body is theoretically possible, suggests that there will be, in time, the need to conceptualize a fresh, metaphysically based mental and material topography, one which promises to be revolutionary and could, through the method of analogy and correspondence, unexpectedly validate the revelatory experiences of mystics, initiates, spiritual philosophers, and intuitive scientists of every culture. A deeper, healthy agnosticism in science will hopefully encourage a wholesome, self-questioning and theoretical openness in every field of knowledge. The discovery of previously unsuspected dimensions of the unknown will undoubtedly be both humbling and encouraging. The best and most perceptive scientists might conceivably turn without to contemplate and examine ancient philosophical perspectives that long ago acknowledged the existence of the intelligent, shape-moving force of consciousness. More importantly, perhaps, many thinkers and scientists in the Aquarian age who engage in meditation will come to recognize and accept the truth that the unbounded spiritual can illuminate and guide the mind of man, but without the loss of free will. And perhaps the very best of the best will independently discover what spiritual teachers have always known and taught, namely, that the spiritual, the intellectual, and sense worlds are dynamically integrated. In the knowledge-inspired and love-expanding Aquarian age, astute thinkers in every field of knowledge will come to understand that there are plateaus in the human mind, as well as in the Himalayas, that there are different orders of perception, rationality, and experience, that the love of truth and the truth of love will eventually help awaken spiritual intuition, which by its nature transcends rationality and leads to the realization of the thing itself. The latter could spark the gradual realization of the reality of the transcendent deific principle that emanates both man and cosmos. Aquarian civilization will hopefully stress in its educational centers the myriad possible connections between spiritual ideals, universal values, and ever-evolving human and social modalities of community building. The utter interdependence of all life, indeed of all existence, can no longer be denied, even by a committed materialist. Moral logic will therefore become as important to social progress as the logic of reason is to philosophy and science. There will be an unapologetic emphasis in Aquarian civilizations on universal justice, universal compassion, and universal concord. As a consequence, the age of Aquarius could conceivably usher in what has been rightly called an empathic civilization, one composed of myriad communities, rooted in truth, compassion, and nonviolence, irrespective of their particular political ideologies. Due to the subtle assimilation in the West of the depth psychology that we find in Buddhism, Hinduism, and in mysticism in general, it could well be that in the future, daily meditation will be as natural as taking a shower to cleanse one's body. Meditation, or the cleansing of the heart and mind through the purifying focus on spiritual ideals, will thus no longer be something unique to Eastern philosophies or to Christian and Sufi mystics. Indeed, meditation, combined with universal service, will constitute the twin pillars of spiritual, psychological, and moral health. As a consequence, pathological loneliness and a host of cognitive, psychological, and moral illnesses will gradually diminish as a sense of inner fullness and authentic self-expression increases. In this respect, we were reminded of a brilliant book published in 1986 by one of the foremost psychiatrists of Great Britain, Garth Wood. He appropriately entitled his work, The Myth of Neurosis, Overcoming the Illness Excuse. The book convulsed the international psychological community and was effectively banned by the American Psychological Association. Wood deftly debunked Freudian psychology and mocked talk show therapists, both of whom attempt to expand the perimeter of mental illness almost indefinitely. Wood did the opposite. He contracted the circle of therapeutic affliction by claiming that there are only two psychological illnesses that require extensive therapy and psychiatric drugs: schizophrenia and manic depression. Most other so-called psychological ailments are industry created to generate profit for self-accredited experts. According to Wood, most human unhappiness can be self-solved by psychological honesty, listening to one's conscience, following common moral sense, and cultivating truthful friends. Wood called this mental posture moral therapy, a therapy that upholds mental health by confronting life's problems courageously. At its core, moral therapy fosters self-respect, the most important quality for sustainable human happiness. As we might well imagine, Wood's book infuriated almost everyone, especially the therapeutic industry. In the Aquarian age, then, it could well be that as skillful meditation on universal ideals becomes more widely practiced, the demand for professional therapy and for its cognitive medications and drugs will wane and lose its appeal. Truthful and trusted friends and colleagues will profoundly reduce the need for expensive therapists. Most significantly, altruism will awaken in true practitioners of meditation, self-study, and service. Such persons will release divine love which heals psychic and astral wounds, as well as purifies perceptions. In the Aquarian civilization of tomorrow, people might well learn the art of thoughtful and compassionate silence as an alchemical solvent for the extensive abuse and misuse of speech. The discipline of spiritual reticence will be natural because the exfoliation of the media-coded mind of modern men will force thoughtful people to turn more and more within. They will discover the holy silence that hovers patiently above the raucous, rational mind. And when the latter is tamed and ordered, it will release profound insights. Thanks to the fusion of mysticism and the spontaneous knowledge derived from contemplating higher order unknowns, there might well be a pervasive feeling of reverence in many seekers of wisdom. Society will be sanctified and blessed by unusual souls whose very presence will be an embodiment of the inspirited mind, and whose laconic utterances and magnanimous gestures will constitute a spontaneous teaching. And unlike the past 2,000 years, individuals with true spiritual gifts will not be either hounded, idolized, or catered to. They will be encouraged to use their unique talents as trustees of global good. And lastly, human love will be rescued from personal desire and possessiveness, and will, as a consequence, flow omnidirectionally to suffering sentient beings everywhere. In the societies of future centuries, it is fervently hoped that men and women will become skilled in the practice of true spiritual friendship within the sacred circle of marriage, that most troubled of all civilizing institutions and modern industrial cultures. While marriage might well be characterized as a lottery with more blanks than prizes, as per HPV, marriage is nonetheless necessary at this juncture of evolution for the human race to perpetuate itself. Those who assume the joys and perils of the marriage bond will need to discover the importance of the Ganesh principle. That is, they must grow to appreciate that less is more. Less emotional speech, more benevolent silence. Less outer profession of love, more inner cherishing. In other words, those committed to the higher possibilities of the marriage bond will learn from ancient Chinese wisdom, which warns against engaging in the excessive verbalization of personal love, the latter being, in the best sense, the quiet joy that the soul feels when in the presence of the beloved. The power of conjugal love will be expressed in many ways, perhaps, but rarely verbally, and even then with discretion. The Aquarian mind's sifting of truth from presumption and self from self-righteousness will help ensure that all the multitudinous forms of love will arise spontaneously in the purified heart. Indeed, it is to be hoped that in the marriage bond just noted, love will express itself through the glow of sweetness in the eyes, through tenderness of touch, through gentleness of gesture, through a respectful tone of voice, and through acts of spontaneous kindness and deliberate forgiveness. And when the word love is whispered in the appropriate time in the ear of the beloved, it will echo the celestial. If so, then it well might be that the listening gods above will be so moved by such powerful, simple acts of eros that they will bow in admiration before such purity of feeling and sanctity of expression. In summary, it could well be that there will be a rebirth of 5 ancient truths that will become the metaphysical, ethical, and metapsychological pillars of any conceivable Aquarian civilization. 1. acknowledgement of the actual existence of a society of sages on earth. 2, the compelling need for wisdom students worldwide to courageously uphold the alchemizing presence of authentic mystery teachings. 3, the recognition of universal harmony as a governing principle in the cosmos and man. 4, the ubiquity of and potential value of human suffering. And 5, the need for the magical therapeutic solvents of reverence and self-sacrifice. It is to be hoped that many men and women in the age of Aquarius will grow up revering all sages, spiritual exemplars, and heroes of past civilizations, as well as unabashedly celebrating spiritual pioneers of the present in their midst. The fortunate few in a mature Aquarian civilization, appreciating the powers of pure thought, will have been taught at an early age the sacred art of raising questions, and most tellingly, of how to patiently think through a social issue, a math problem, a moral dilemma, or a family crisis. They will not be strangers to rethinking an idea, to musing and meditating in solitude, to learning from unexpected mystical flashes, to consulting their own inner genius, and to summoning the better angels of their deeper nature when in the travails of trial. They will also immensely enjoy the elevating dynamics of human interaction for the focused good of society. And like many ancient cultures, they will not hesitate to invoke the presiding deities to bless such wholesome communal occasions, and thereby celebrate their citizenship in the cosmos of benign, altruistic intelligences. Societies of Theosophists, wherever and however situated, are privileged to be the conscious custodians of the mystery fires. As wisdom students, we are fortune's favored soldiers, and thus our responsibilities are, in this particular regard, awesome. We must carry the torch of our dialectical, open-ended teachings into the future by infusing words and deeds with the illuminating energy of devotion to the brotherhood of bodhisattvas, and by cultivating unconditional personal regard for fellow students and humanity as a whole. In this respect, it will be paramount for theosophical meetings to reinfuse this philosophical discourse with bhakti, rational wisdom questing with unconditional devotion to the Mahatmas as living, enlightening, and guiding presences. Without bhakti, reason will never be inspired or noetic, nor will the primary imagination be able to take flight into the transcendent empyrean, Plato's heaven beyond heaven. As Judge points out in his notes on the Bhagavad Gita, without bhakti, it is not possible to awaken buddhi. Nothing less will make our lodges centers of spiritual influences, ones which enlighten and heal souls across continents and throughout coming epochs. The dynamic regulating principle of harmony will most likely emerge out of science, but will eventually be regarded as an ethical as well as a scientific principle. That is, it will be seen as pertinent to establishing the dynamics of universal human justice, as it will be to grasping nature's mathematically elegant and ever-evolving laws. In science per se, harmony will be seen as a law that integrates, sustains, and regenerates the forces of nature in endless cycles of intelligent activity. In society, justice or karma will be recognized as a unifying principle in the domain of individual and social relationships, energized by the exercise of a discretionary moral choice. As traditional and modern cultures intermingle and clash to the gyrations of the fundamental revolution that is unrelentingly circumambulating the globe, there will be no protection from suffering. The disharmonies provoked by violent religious disagreements, competitive nationalism, and racial misunderstandings will redefine the spectrum of self-inflicted and collective misery. Nonetheless, the subtle transformations in collective consciousness from traditional religion to spirituality, from a closed system materialism to a scientifically open ontology, from a capitalist morality to a vibrant global ethic, will increase awareness that the roots of all forms of suffering lie in ignorance and selfishness. And the only medicine for these voracious maladies will be the self-administered curative of conscious cooperation for the greater good of all. In this sense, voluntary suffering on behalf of the inclusive divine ignites spiritual awakening. Ultimately, any worthy Aquarian community will seek to restore the felt sense of the sacred. If so, then reverence for what is holy and unifying within religion, philosophy, and science will be pivotal. The resurgence of healing veneration will impregnate all three and morally vitalize the mind of those who sense their connection with the divine within the heart. It'll be recognized then that the sacred is not only forever transcendent, but eternally immanent. If so, then self-sacrifice will be as natural as breathing, and the most effective medicine for all the ills unwittingly released by Pandora. On the whole, the refined Aquarian mentality will be one that stresses universality, fraternity, and self-regeneration. And it will spontaneously resonate to the telling parapolitical insight of America's foremost philanthropist, Thomas Paine. This fearless welcomer of intuitive visions stated that the humble mind of man is the only temple, cathedral, or mosque needed to worship the everywhere divine. In other words, when the human mind becomes hospitable to the immortal within, its translucent light will shine forth for the benefit of all. In this sense, the religious man's belief will arise out of his inner attunement to the voice of God. And likewise, the political man's voice of conscience will at times supersede the voice of the populace. If there's any truth in the foregoing, that it is important for theosophists in various theosophical societies to create focused occasions in which they may contribute to the salubrious emergence of a global republic of conscience. This would involve deliberately discussing vibrant philosophical concepts necessary for compassionate civilizing centers to arise on the globe in the millennia ahead. In this respect, the coupled concepts of justice and mercy, equality and excellence, conscience and civility, truth and nonviolence seem particularly apt to discuss in order to help shape the thought forms of the future and summon waiting jnana yogins from previous lustrous cultures to incarnate. In closing, we can only hope that today's pathfinders, preparing for the high civilizations to come, will resonate to Shelley's peroration on the future labors of mankind. Quote, "And our singing shall build in the void's loose field a world for the spirit of wisdom to wield. We will take our plan from the new world of man, and our work shall be called the Promethean." Unquote. Such is one vision of Theosophy and the Aquarian civilization of tomorrow. Thank you.